listening to AC/DC Beyond the Thunder, the podcast with the biggest balls of all. With your host, Kurt Squires. It's time to rock.
Greetings, podcasters. I'm your host, Kurt Squires, and this is AC/DC Beyond the Thunder, a show where we talk about, you guessed it, AC/DC. Today, our guest is Saul Hudson, better known by his stage name as Slash, lead guitarist of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame band Guns N' Roses, and one of the greatest guitar players in rock history. Over the years, Slash has formed other notable side bands such as Snake Pit, Velvet Revolver, and some pretty excellent solo work with Miles Kennedy and the Conspirators. This interview took place in 2014 exclusively for the Beyond the Thunder documentary, just months before Rock or Bust was released. And this was before anyone, including Slash himself, expected his own bandmate Axl Rose to front AC/DC halfway through that tour. Now let's take you backstage with Slash prior to his headlining show in New Hampshire. Slash, thanks so much for carving out a bit of your busy schedule to talk about the Thunder from Down Under. What is it about AC/DC that makes them so relevant after all these years?
You know, AC/DC has become seriously an institution. They're the only band that's stayed around for as long as they have, doing the thing that they do and doing it better than anybody else. And they've become sort of the mainstay of hard driving, sort of simple but straight ahead rock and roll, sort of blues and R&B oriented. You know, I mean, there's nobody else that really does it from the heart.
Our paths have crossed a couple of times. One of those was in London at the Classic Rock Awards show, where you were on stage presenting to Joe Perry of Aerosmith, a band that you adore and treasure just as much as AC/DC. You were talking about your Aerosmith moment. Do you have an AC/DC moment?
My big AC/DC moment, I have to say, happened when Back in Black came out. That was like, because I'd only heard Highway to Hell before that, and that was always with the kids that were older than me, because at that time I was pretty young. But when Back in Black came out, I think I was probably, 15. I'd already started playing guitar, and it just, it was just this thing. There was a certain power that record had, and I was actually at my friend's house when I first heard it, and that was the guy, his dad is the one that named me Slash. Huh. So that was at that period. So yeah, there's a little bit of the first Slash days started around that time that Back in Black came out.
That's pretty wild. So the time that you acquired the name Slash was also your AC/DC moment. Pretty cool. The other time we crossed paths that I wanted to mention was during the Stiff Upper Lip tour. I was out in the audience, and I looked to my right, and none other than Slash is standing right beside me watching AC/DC perform. And I turned to you, shook your hand, and said, "Hey, Slash." And you said, "Greatest rock and roll band in the world right there." And you pointed to the stage. And I thought that was so cool.
Well, man, I'm a rock fan first and foremost, and God knows there's so many rock bands, but there's nobody, there's only a few bands that really bring it. AC/DC being one of a kind rock and roll band have always been, as far as I was concerned, one of the most paramount rock and roll bands ever,
Tell us about Slash's Snake Pit supporting AC/DC on that Stiff Upper Lip tour.
I put the Snake Pit record out, and we had a tour lined up and whatnot, and the offer came in to play with AC/DC, and I had financial issues to be able to do that particular tour, whatever. And I've been over backwards to make it happen, because it's just, to me, the ultimate rock show is when you put a package together where you have two bands that sort of gel well together, right, and sort of represent the same kind of vibe.
Yeah.
And so I was really stoked to be on that tour.
Yeah, that's great.
And then there was a point there I actually got really sick on that tour and had to bow out of the last quarter of
That's
it.
Right.
I think it was.
That's right. I forgot about
like
that.
2001.
I was hoping to see you take the stage and trade solos with Angus on that tour, but as we know, that's not something AC/DC typically embraces. So, although I have seen a photo of you and Brian Johnson sharing the stage, what was that occasion?
Yeah. I jammed with Brian a bunch of times. I don't know which picture you saw, but I mean, he played with Velvet Revolver once. We've jammed a couple times.
Do you still keep in touch with Brian?
I talk to Brian a lot, but I haven't talked to him in the last year.
You'd think in this age of information overload that we'd have some inkling as to what is going on with that band, but you'd figure Brian might give you a hint, maybe.
I figured he would, but I didn't want to bug, so.
I've never seen a band so successfully pull off being as tight-lipped and as private as they've been throughout their entire career, maybe aside from ZZ Top. But part of me loves the mystery. The other part feels like this long-distance relationship of seeing someone you care about every 5 to 10 years. Like, for instance, when you were on the road together, did you ever see them backstage, or were they like ghosts passing in the night?
Yeah, I mean, I saw them. And, I mean, I think they sort of protect themselves from outside bullshit, which is wise. But internally, they're great,
Yeah.
They don't seem like that when you're actually on tour with them. Quiet, though, for the most part.
That's cool. So what kind of camaraderie did you share with each other while you were on the road? They're pretty business-like, right? Were there arguments, any pranks, late night dinners, advice? Did you exchange gifts?
I actually gave Angus a snakeskin SG for his birthday on that tour.
You're kidding me. I didn't know Gibson even made one of those.
I had it made.
Wow, you gave him a custom one? That was really nice of you.
Well, it just shows how, it's just one of those things, a token of whatever, respect. And
speaking of the guitar, your weapon of choice, how does Angus Young influence your own playing, which is essentially a heavy version of the blues?
A lot of stuff that I do culls from the same place where Angus comes from, and then there's a lot of things that I do that I get, sort of attack stuff that I can sort of attribute to Angus, So yeah, there's a lot of different things because we're basically playing the same kind of stuff. So it's like an attitude that sort of crosses over between the two of us.
Right. So which artists do AC/DC unmistakably lift from that you can hear embedded within their own music?
In AC/DC, there's a lot of Chuck Berry.
Yeah.
Just old school. A lot of what I would consider Elvis Presley, 50s, Buddy Holly, that kind of rock and roll, chord changes and stuff like that. But then they just turned it into something of their own.
Right.
For sure. From the very first AC/DC record, there was definitely a direction that was uniquely theirs, but the influences are obvious, but then there's their own stamp that they put on it that's totally identifiable and undeniable.
Right.
And they've just been building on that. And you can tell that they're very fixed on a certain thing because everything they do is some variation of the same thing. And that's why the name of their band is so great, because those are the 3 chords that basically, No, it's true. There's only a couple other chords that aren't in their name that they use.
Yeah, I guess you're right. That's funny.
They've come up with every conceivable, even Keith Richards likes them, and he hates just about everybody. Because they're purists, and they have come up with every conceivable combination of those chords.
It's such a great endorsement to have Keith Richards on your side, isn't it? Name-dropping AC/DC is one of his favorite bands. I remember reading a Rolling Stone article in the late 80s by Anthony DeCurtis. And this is a magazine, by the way, that never gave AC/DC the light of day. And he was asking Keith Richards what he thought about the hottest artists out there at the time. And we're talking about Bruce Springsteen. Keith called him pretentious. And then he mentioned Prince, and Keith said he liked Pee Wee Herman better. And then George Michael, and he said that George Michael was a wimp in disguise and to shave and go home or something like that. So he was being pretty brutal. And then Keith basically said that he didn't like much, but he liked AC/DC. I nearly framed that article, so I'm glad you brought that up. And so why do people like Keith and fans around the globe share this common bond with this band?
Because rock and roll is very, it's people's music. It has a certain attitude. We get into what rock and roll is all about, and that's a whole conversation unto itself. But there's something genuine in what AC/DC does. The thing about rock and roll is everybody loves it. It's just not everybody can do it. They think they can, but there's something very. There's a human connection in rock and roll. A lot of people, if you're doing it for the wrong reasons, or whatever, if you're not coming from a pure place, people pick up on it and it doesn't turn them on. AC/DC's always been super genuine in their musical direction and approach, and people relate to it, and so it's worked, globally. Everybody loves it. And I think rock and roll everybody loves. It's just been diluted so much with outside interests or other agendas that it's not really, they say it's rock and roll, but it's not,
That's a great answer. It's true. People do pick up on the authenticity of an artist. And if there's one thing about AC/DC, it's that they are genuine. And part of their authenticity is the fact that they don't often appear on the late night shows or the award shows. And yet, in some way, they've built a mystique in becoming even more popular in doing so. I'm not sure how.
Zeppelin was like that too. You just have to make good music. People don't need to see you on TV necessarily. I remember back in the day, I saw AC/DC on Don Kirshner's rock concert. So they were around back then, but as soon as they got big, it wasn't really necessary to do all that. And I don't even know if they ever got a Grammy.
They actually did finally receive a Grammy for War Machine off Black Ice, which is something that feels like the voting members said to themselves, okay, how can we not give these guys a Grammy after all these years? So let's just pick this track. It's not exactly something AC/DC will ever play live again, but they did win one.
All things considered, the Grammys is the kind of thing where they don't even know, when it comes to rock and roll and like those categories of stuff other than popular sort of top 40 stuff, they don't know which way is up anyway.
Yeah, I'm not sure the Grammys even know how to categorize musical genres anymore or keep up with the sea of music out there, let alone a major band like AC/DC.
Well, it's sad that when it comes to certain kinds of music, they have absolutely no clue, which is a drag. But anyway, no one really cares. We just do what we do. But I don't think AC/DC I think part of their charm is the fact that they've never catered to the sort of TV and sort of like the trying to be popular with the media and with sort of like pop culture, in the sense that they show up at radio things and TV, presentations and whatnot.
Yeah,
sort of just, they do one thing and they do it better than anybody else, and that's all they concentrate on.
I totally agree. It's actually taken so long for the media to catch up with AC/DC, including Rolling Stone magazine, which took nearly 35 years to put them on the cover. And only once.
Yeah, I could say that, and that in itself, especially when you do the size of venues and the amount of people that go to see AC/DC, and for as long as they've been doing it at that level, for them not to be recognized, it's got to sort of piss them off a little bit,
It either pisses them off or it's all part of their master plan of lying low and not buying into the whole rock star thing that fuels most musicians.
So that just gives you more fuel. That's the great thing about rock and roll is it's a medium where, I say genre, but it's really sort of, it's a thing where it's anti all that anyway, and it's not supposed to be about, everybody having to like you. You just do what you do, and you have your own personal self-expression, and people can take it or leave it, So the more people who choose to ignore how great and massive AC/DC is, the more they can just give them the finger, I love that.
You come from a pretty creative background. Your mother was a costume designer whose clients included David Bowie, Ringo Starr, and Janis Joplin. And your father was an artist who designed album covers for such musicians as Neil Young and Joni Mitchell, right?
Yeah.
And then some of that artistic DNA rubbed off on you as well. Didn't you illustrate something for an Aerosmith album cover?
I did. I know.
That's pretty cool.
I didn't actually do it for them. I did it way back when I was in junior high school.
Oh, wow.
Because it was this drawing that I did, and I gave it to my friend Mark Canner, who was a huge diehard, at that time, like sneak into hotels, go to every show and sneak in cameras, diehard fan.
Wow.
And he printed up some copies and gave them to different people, and it just went through this big circle. I met Izzy through that drawing. He came to my work and asked me if I had a copy of it. And so I guess at some point the Aerosmith guys saw it, and so Steven called me up later and said, hey, did you have one of that drawing that you did of the band? So I had to call Mark and get a copy of it.
Wow, so you connected with Izzy Stradlin and Steven Adler, your childhood friend who you formed your first band with, and also Guns N' Roses, connecting your drawing from junior high. Talk about a full circle.
So that's a full circle.
So your father's this fairly well-known album cover designer. Did you ever bring home any AC/DC albums to get his opinion on the band's image?
Well, let's see. I mean, I didn't see AC/DC album covers until I was sort of moved out. I was definitely raised on album covers.
So being around album cover designs all the time, did you have a favorite AC/DC cover, given your trained eye?
I have to say the Highway to Hell album cover was my favorite AC/DC album cover because it was just so subtle, just a band photo, but with the tail in the horns. I mean, that was a great fucking, a great cover.
It's a classic cover for sure. It definitely got my attention at 10 years old. My favorite AC/DC song of all time is off of that album, Night Prowler. And I meant to ask you, you were born in London and then moved to California at the age of 5. So you were living in LA during the time of the Night Stalker and the Richard Ramirez killings, right?
Oh, yeah.
What was it like living so close to those horrible murders and having the media and even the police associating these events with a band that we idolize so much?
I used to play Night Prowler in Snake Pit.
Oh, wow.
And that song is one of the greatest sort of rock and roll blues, takes on a blues kind of vibe for a rock and roll band ever, and
I agree.
Straight ahead, slow blues, And the fact that the Ramirez was quoting their song, there was a period of a lot of that going on around that time. AC/DC wasn't the only one. I'm sure it was hard for them. I mean, I sort of was like, well, I guess he's got to listen to something, You can't take that stuff too seriously. I mean, music's out there for everybody. If you stopped and thought about what different kinds of people might be listening to music, be it good or bad, in detail, and thought about the possibilities, it would be overwhelming.
Right.
You just put it out there and people listen to it and they come to your shows and you get sort of an idea when you meet people, some of the people that are out there buying the record, but God knows it's not all of them,
Right. Not to harp too much on the Ramirez thing, because I know that was not one of their favorite points in history. But so you're out on the road with the boys, and you've seen a fair share of merch out there. I mean, it's pretty much everywhere now. Believe me, I own too much of AC/DC merch. What's your favorite AC/DC item that you've seen over the years?
Dude, the coolest fucking rock and roll piece of merchandise I ever saw was, I think it was the last AC/DC tour with the little fucking hats with the horns that light up. That was killer. The whole arena. I saw them at the Staples. The whole fucking place had these hats on, and they're all flashing, and it was fucking great. Yeah.
And what do you think of all their marketing? It's pretty much a self-running money-making machine at this point.
It works. I'm a t-shirt guy, and I'm one of those guys who likes stuff on the back of their leather jacket or whatever. So as long as it looks cool, I think it's great. You have people out there, it's sort of like a stamp, It's cool. I mean, there's some merchandise that's obviously really silly, but I've always been cool with t-shirts and fucking baseball hats and...
Right. There's AC/DC Monopoly, AC/DC wine, and as an avid pinball player like yourself, you must love their AC/DC pinball machine.
I've played it, yes.
And is there ever a cutoff point for a band like AC/DC? I mean, obviously a poor question if we're talking about Kiss, but what about AC/DC?
Yeah, as long as as long as it doesn't go into an area. I mean, it does. My opinion doesn't really matter anyway. But I mean, there's some stuff when you can tell you're just really, really trying to capitalize on something that's not even within the scope of what they're about. A lot of people do that, but AC/DC always manages to keep it within the realm of AC/DC cool.
Okay, it looks like we're getting the signal that it's time to sign off before your curtain call. Slash, thanks so much for being a part of AC/DC Beyond the Thunder. It was great to finally connect and talk about one of the greatest bands of all time from one of the greatest guitarists of all time. And real quickly, Slash, if you had one word to describe AC/DC in a nutshell, one word that sums up the power that this band has had on people and this planet, what would yours be?
Fucking brilliant.
AC/DC Beyond the Thunder theme song, Trailer Trash, written and performed by Gannon Arnold. VO talent by Bruce Jacobson. Cinematography and sound recording by Greg Ferguson. Photography, Louis Torrieri. Edited and mixed by Eric Kield. Brand ambassador and marketing guru, Gino Bona. Written, directed, and hosted by Kurt Squires. Produced by Gino Bona, Greg Ferguson, Eric Kield, and Kurt Squires. AC/DC Beyond the Thunder is a Squires LLC current motion production. Copyright Beyond the Thunder podcast, all rights reserved. This has been a Nat Attack presentation. Shazbot. Nanu Nanu.